This is, again, simulation results, giving some idea of what's going on. So on this left axis, we have the average cost of a unit. As you increase, so 50 cents is what you should be paying for these offsets. That's the environmental externality. As you increase your payment per hectare towards 50 cents, the cost that you're actually paying for real reductions rises, which is really obvious. On the other axis, we have the percentage of the offsets that is spurious. And if you pay a very low price per hectare, you actually have quite a high percentage. In this case, between 40 and 50% of your offsets will be spurious. As the price rises, you get more and more people actually opting into the system, and the percentage of offsets that is spurious goes down. In this case, quite close to zero by the time you get to the true cost. So key conclusions. Large scale is better, and I think there's no question that if we can do these things on at least a large region scale, or better still on a national scale, we minimise leakage, we improve monitoring capacity, the ability to monitor, and we avoid a lot of this adverse selection sort of problem. Other results are not so clear. There begin to be trade-offs. So stringent baselines can be a good idea. They lower the average cost, and because they raise the quality of the offsets. But if you push too hard to make the baselines really stringent, you get no participation at all, and the countries just don't engage, and then you get a big efficiency loss. And I think that's where we are in the international negotiations now. Discounting seems really attractive. It does lower the average cost to industrialised countries, but it reduces the quality of offsets, and potentially quite devastatingly. If you are doing this discounting in the way that the EU, for example, does with CDM credits, for CDM you're only allowed a certain number of CDM units go into the emissions trading market in Europe. That lowers the value of CERs, so the CDM units are worth less in the European market. It does control the damage from buying spurious offsets or non-additional offsets because it limits the total number that you can buy, but it actually makes the quality of those offsets worse, and it makes the efficiency of the program worse. So offsets look even worse than they should have to be. Trading ratios may be able to protect the environment, but they could do so at a very high efficiency cost. They also mean that the developing country is getting a very low payment for their deforestation, so there are some equity issues involved there. So I will stop there.
Okay, we have some questions.
Frank. Oh, sorry.
So, I was thinking about the Indonesia case again. As I understand, they recently signed an agreement with Norway facilitated by Conservation International to do all of Indonesia, I guess. So bigger is better.
Mm-hmm.
What I hear from the folks who work on Indonesia is that this has to be implemented at local scale, and the control the federal government has at local scale is very limited. So it seems like there may be a problem there in terms of actually executing this agreement. So it's big is better from the point of view of eliminating these errors, but it may be worse from the point of view of execution. Is that the case?
Yeah.
Or?
What we're focusing here is on the design of what the international community does when interacting with these sorts of countries. And if you wanted the international community to go into the local areas in Indonesia, you would have to argue that for some reason foreigners have some comparative advantage in actually running Indonesian policy. And I find that relatively unlikely. It may be true in some sense that they will be better at it, but in terms of sovereignty, that really doesn't go down particularly well. So you have to think about the domestic implementation quite separately, and that is another whole very difficult thing to do. It doesn't have to be through offsets at a domestic level. It may be in Indonesia. I mean, the major causes of deforestation are to do with corruption in their concessions and forestry systems, and corruption in the allocation of land to oil plantations and so on. And you might be able to change that without having anything to do with the specific landowners. If the people who control the policies that are creating the problem have some reason to do so through this revenue. Of course, that creates all sorts of political challenges as well.
My question overlaps and follows directly on, because I think there's good reason to be optimistic about a nation-to-nation transaction on rate. I think Indonesia is a good indication, and know, a lot of the waste conditioning are actually at the national level, dealing with Indonesia. But I think then the problems you're talking about are to a large extent actually just pushed onto the Indonesian government, who are dealing with lots and lots of local governments.
But you're assuming that the Indonesian government is using a domestic offset system.
Well, that's the question.
And I think that that's probably not the right thing for the Indonesian government to do. And there are a lot of ways that you can affect deforestation. It may be to do with agricultural subsidies, it might be with roads, it might be to do with forestry policies. Those are things that could be done and might have material impacts on deforestation. The Indonesian government can do that. I don't think they have any more ability to do a landowner by landowner offset system. And you have to be a country like New Zealand to do that. I mean, even Australia won't talk about that seriously, so goodness. No, I don't think Indonesia's going to be jumping in. But there are a lot of other things that they can do, particularly as there are so many diverse reasons why they're deforesting.
So my associated worry is, how do you dish out the rewards and penalties to different groups? You know, I think if you take Australia Inc., Victoria cheats on New South Wales or vice versa. It seems to me you come back to the local scale.
What do you mean cheats on?
Well, Australia Inc. says it meets its stuff. Victoria claims that they did it all. New South Wales claims they did it all. Somebody's going to have to measure what each of those states or components did.
Only if you want to manage it that way, right? And from the international point of view, I don't care whether Victoria does
That's
it
true.
or Queensland
That's
does
true.
it, right? That's an internal issue. And the way that the money is spread within the country is an internal issue too. And it has huge human rights implications and distribution implications. But it's not the internationals. I don't think it's the international government's role to tell Indonesia how they should distribute money within Indonesia.
No, I agree.
And I don't think we have the ability to control that.
But it seems to me the country that gets the money does have a problem.
They definitely have to work out how. But of course, some of that money has to be used to implement the policies that will actually create the deforestation reduction. So, there may not be much left over afterwards.
I just wanted to highlight that a lot of the decisions in Indonesia are taken at the local level by local governments. And so the Indonesian central government has a similar problem as what you're describing for the international community dealing directly.
They definitely do. Yeah, they definitely do. And they may choose to disaggregate it and do it at a province level. I think there's been some conversation about that. Also, to be clear, the Norway agreement with Indonesia is not performance-based. It's not a results-based agreement. They're paying for programs. They're not actually measuring deforestation relative to baseline and rewarding on that yet. They're in the transition phase through. So they're not quite doing what we're talking about, but they're moving that way. The one in Brazil is.
Okay, last one.
I remember you mentioned unbiased error, or there's not being unbiased error. So I assume, does that mean that you're assuming that these different projects or the different things that the ends are counting are statistically independent?
The model, the results I showed just then assume they're statistically independent. Of course they're not. As you get higher spatial correlation, you have to have